Very much and very warmly welcome you to our Worlds of Consciousness 2021 in this online event. And it's time to again celebrate consciousness. We have 2.5 hours of a wonderful journey ahead of us with wonderful people here on my side. We see already Jan Raak and David Lorimer with me, and also Brenda Dunn just disappeared, but I think she will soon be back. It's really my pleasure again to make this journey together with you through the worlds of consciousness, and we will approach consciousness and what it means to be a conscious being, a human being, actually from different sides. Normally we start more with the intellectual aspect, more with the scientific side of it, and then we're moving ahead until in the end we will have more experiential approach with meditation. Also this time again we have spiritual leaders in the end, like Satchidananda Swami and Eddie Stern from New York, who is an excellent yoga master and who will show us the connection between the breath and the development of our consciousness. But let's start our journey here with I think the journey of consciousness is not just an individual journey as we all undergo it within our life, like we are born in a, I would say, consciousness of unity with our mother, and then we are growing up, and our individual consciousness painfully is rising until we leave home and explore the world. So that's our individual story, but humanity in itself goes through the same struggle also. I don't want to go deeply into this topic, but if you just look in our European civilization, within the last 1,000 years, it was an amazing journey, and one very important man of this journey, his name is Galileo Galilei. I think with him and others around him, this scientific age started, and he was so much changing with his approach, the way how we deal with reality, that we actually use our senses to explore the world outside. But this also means that we are focusing so much on the external, whereas the ancient humans on this planet, they look from inside, experiencing themselves as a soul. So soul is a very ancient concept of consciousness. But now we're living in an age where soul is not anymore an object of scientific discussion. So but right now there is a big change going on. And David Lorimer, who is our first speaker today, we know each other for more than 25 years. Already that time you have been the director of the Scientific and Medical Network, and I believe this Scientific and Medical Network is a wonderful contribution to this ongoing paradigm shift of refocusing on consciousness within science, but also within medicine. And I think many of our listeners today are interested in what does it mean for looking at ourselves, at our body, to be a human, to be a conscious being. Because many therapists are also watching today, I know this, so this will be very interesting introduction into the theme. And you have started this project called the Galileo Report, which I think wants to initiate a new renaissance. But I leave this topic to you, as you have started it. So we start our discussion which goes into the same direction, with Professor Jan Raak. We have been already few times, many times. I mean, we have had so many discussions about how to deal with consciousness within science. And I think your approach is very much through quantum physics, because if you look at the period in science before quantum physics arose in the beginning of the last century, consciousness was more a consideration of theology or philosophy, and then quantum physics happened. So what changed that time?
I think that the quantum physics kind of has maybe some other also discovery in physics, like theory of relativity, but mainly the quantum physics told us that the classical view on the reality, as we kind of people used to kind of think for many hundreds of years, is very different, right? So it told us that the consciousness is kind of the key player in the process of building the reality, right? So to my opinion, the quantum physics is a borderline where the humanity kind of enters the new era of the understanding of the reality and all this real life is about, right? So that's what I think, right?
And yes, and today we don't have so much time to go really into the very great detail, but we are also planning a seminar where you are one of the speakers, and we have a lot of time that it will start in beginning of April, and it's hosted like this event also by the Dev Sanskriti University. It's a beautiful university at the feet of the Himalaya mountains, where I've stayed many times. And at one point we shall do a consciousness conference there together with the yogis. We will
absolutely
we will invite a scientist from all over the world and the yogis from the Himalaya to meet at this beautiful campus. But
right.
Before we can do this, we have this webinar starting on the 9th of April, and Alexander will give us the slide. This is a slide prepared by the university which is hosting the program. Yes, this one. Here we are. The webinar, the seminar, it's an online certificate course of the Dev Sanskriti University. It's called Expansions of Quantum Theory Towards Consciousness. Because the original quantum theory as it was developed in the 20s of the last century, it's actually not really dealing with consciousness, but
right.
It kind of changes the situation of having a subject which is not involved and describing a purely objective reality, because this is really the understanding of classical physics and classical science, like the biology of the 19th century and the physics of the 19th century, that there is a subject, a transcendental subject, which is absolutely for itself, and it's looking at an objective material reality which doesn't have any traces of subjectivity within. And I think this is really what happened when Albert Einstein and Max Planck and then Niels Bohr and Heisenberg and Schrödinger, when they unwillingly discovered the quantum world, that it changed everything. Suddenly, traces of subjectivity appeared in the objective. And this was so much bewildering for everyone. It was bewildering for Einstein, who said, my God doesn't throw dice or doesn't play dice. And there were so many paradoxes. So now, more than 100 years later, we're still looking at the same quantum physics, but we know quantum physics can't be true. We have to base all sciences on it, because it's in all the experiments, they show that there's so much truth within it, but absolutely it can't be true. And many scientists like Roger Penrose, for example, who just got a Nobel Prize last year, they consider consciousness to be the missing link. If we find consciousness, we can bridge build a bridge between quantum physics and theory of relativity. So quantum consciousness or quantum consciousness seems to be really what we need to rediscover. And probably we can't rediscover it by just looking outside or just looking inside, but we need a completely new integrated approach of consciousness. So on this way, there's a lot of very interesting theories developed, new approaches to quantum physics, and this we want to talk about in this webinar, which will be each Friday afternoon. We have wonderful speakers. You are, as an experimental physicist, one of them, and will speak about certain really amazing experiments of quantum physics, like the or effects which have been recently discovered, like the quantum Sino effect, or as you some years ago have talked to me about the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment, something really mind-blowing. So this is really the things which trigger our fascination in consciousness. We will have Professor Harald Wallach there, who was our guest in the morning, who has himself developed generalized quantum theory. But we need also the philosophers to understand this. Professor Heinrichs is a very deep-thinking philosopher in the school of the German idealism, who looks at the ontological basis of quantum theory. So this is it's a wonderful program. And from yesterday on, our listeners can actually register to this webinar. It's a certificate course of the Dev Sanskriti University, which will issue a certificate to all the successful participants. There will be a small interactive test also at the end. So it's not enough to just participate and listen, but you need to actively listen. So I invite all those of you who have an academic or scientific background or interest. You might be students, or you might be practitioners or medical doctors, or just practitioners, a therapist. So you are every day dealing with the phenomenon of consciousness in a practical way. So all of you are invited, and we will, I'm not sure if we enabled the chat already, but we will soon enable the chat, and Hans Werner probably will be, it's already enabled. Hans Werner will share the link with all of us where you can register. So maybe, David, you are back? Not yet. Oh, yes. Some problem with your microphone or your computer not recognizing your microphone. So we will come back later. So, Jan, what is your approach to consciousness? I think you have prepared a small presentation to us.
Right. So we shall start with my presentation, right?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I don't see it yet. Yeah, very good. So my approach, I am kind of speaking as a scientist and as a physicist. So what I would like to share with you, if I can see my slides again.
We are working on it.
Very good. Right. My approach is kind of, I'm trying to think as a scientist, but I see also that there is a lot of kind of synergy with the, ancient mysticism and so on. So I kind of pick up this little dialogue, which kind of summarizes of what I am kind of attracted to, and that's the dialogue between some master and disciple about by what light do you see? And the disciple answered that the sun by the day and the lamp by the night. And then the master, by what light do you see these lights? And the disciple said, the eyes. And the master said, but what light do you see the eye? And the disciple said, by mind. And by what light do you see the mind? And he replied, myself. And then the master said, you then are the light of lights, right? And the disciple said, yes, that's I am. So I think it's kind of nicely summarizes the thing that all what it is the mind or the consciousness, right?
Jan, please, I just don't want to interrupt you, but please put on your camera. Then I can disappear and leave the seat
very
to
good.
you.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, thank you.
So what I'm kind of thinking a lot about is what is the concurrent scientific paradigm what is the prevailing worldview? And I think the science itself is based on the Christian dogma, which is the belief system, which is kind of based on, it's kind of dogmatic, right? But however, even the students are getting the PhD title, which means it's the doctor of philosophy. And the philosophy is kind of, some kind of view which unify the spirituality and this objectivism. So I think I'm advocating since I was the whole my career as I work as a scientist in this frame of materialistic objectivism. I think that the future means that the science, it doesn't mean that we have to throw away what we have discovered in science, but I think the way for the future is kind of some kind of unification between the spirituality and the objectivism. So we have witnessed the paradigm revolution, and I think these days we are witnessing also kind of the breaking down the old paradigm. So in 20th century, the main kind of revolution came from the theory of relativity, where Albert Einstein undermined the Newton mechanics and absolute space and time. And I think that was really a revolution. And in the same time also comes the quantum mechanics, where many famous names like Rutherford, Planck, Bohr, Dirac, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, and so on, undermine the Newton and Einstein classical view of what the reality is, right? And we should not forget that there is also the incompleteness theorem of Kurt Friedrich Gödel, who kind of showed us the limit of mathematical logic, right? So then I am also adding that in the 21st century, there is also some kind of a new insight from the string theory and the holographic universe. It's not exactly 21st century, but it kind of brings us to new view what that the reality might come as a holographic projection from the two-dimensional space. And what I also realized that there is a huge progress in IT, so to speak, technology, meaning that the artificial intelligence, for example, can teach us a lot what the consciousness and the kind of this mind issue, what it is, right? So this is kind of the topic where I'm very actively dealing with recent years. The artificial intelligence and all these IT technologies are, to my opinion, very important. So back to the physics in 21st century, so the special theory of relativity, as that, time, there is a dilation, which means that the flow of time very much depends on what observer in which states it is, whether it's moving, relative to the observation or not. There is also the length contraction and so on. So then there is a general theory of relativity which copes with gravity and quantum mechanics, which especially the relativistic quantum field theory, which can describe, so to speak, what all forces are govern the universe, right? So that's the quantum electrodynamics, the weak electromagnetic force, and quantum chromodynamics, the strong force. So that's what what the mainstream or what the majority of the scientists are kind of following. And from that it stems also these things like that. The concurrent view of cosmology told us that all the matter and material is created in the Big Bang. So that's the Big Bang theory based of the Einstein general relativity. And the consequences kind of is that the universe is expanding, right? It's the space-time is not anymore, flat as a Euclidean, but it's kind of curved. And the universe is kind of dark. So 96% of all matter is invisible matter and energy, and only 4% is ordinary matter, right? So, this can be generalized, and we are saying that the kind of the mainstream view is kind of philosophical and scientifically is this local realism and objectivism. It means that it's also our culture is based on this fundamental belief that reality is equal to matter. It means that the matter is primordial, coming from the Big Bang theory, and mind is a byproduct of matter self-organization. So, however, no one can really say how does the consciousness arise from the matter, right? So this question is known as the fundamental problem of consciousness, and it remains a mystery, right? So from my point of view, it kind of looks like that the materialism is, so to speak, irrational, right? So, and I think that might be the last slide, that this local realism and objectivism, I like to a lot of inspiration, as Marcus already mentioned, comes from Roger Penrose, who actually did a lot of interesting work in terms of what the consciousness is and how it may kind of come from the brain, is this microtubule and so on. But I have here the note from Rupert Spira, who said that the ultimate reality, the playground for the apparent mind-matter duality, is consciousness, right? And ignoring of these basic facts creates the unpleasant feeling of the existence threat. It leads to the conflict between communities and nations. So I think that's kind of the essence of what I want to say, that the consciousness is the only what is. This void nothingness without the form is this kind of this I in this I am kind of creation of what is, and the movement of I creates this I am, the mind. So what we can talk about the experience is only this yen. I remains the ultimate reality which cannot be recognized by this yen. But what I want to say, that there is a lot of kind of way how to approach the understanding what the consciousness actually is, from even by using the tools of the modern science, like this quantum mechanics, string theory, and also the development of this artificial intelligence. So there is a lot of other slides I have prepared for this presentation, but this might be kind of for the reader to glance through, and this will be also framing my contribution to this April seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. And I also like to greet Chris. Do you hear me, Chris? Yes. So nice.
I do hear you.
So nice that you joined us, and Brenda also found her way back.
Oh, sorry, my computer froze.
Yes, no problem. You will be there in the right time. And I just, yes, thank you, Jan. You mentioned something, and that in our modern, like, European worldview, which now has expanded all over the world, first into the western direction and then to the eastern direction, nowadays is very much based on the Christian belief system, on the dogma of Christianity. And we found some comments in the chat already in the morning that this is, Professor Wallach was commenting that this is not really what Christianity is all about, isn't it? Because there is some very deep, genuine spirituality within Christianity and within all the religions. So what is your understanding of this?
Look, this is absolutely, look, I think that in the frame of any kind of institution, there is always kind of some kind of ideas. And I think, look, the Christian mysticism, for example, is very deep and, spiritual. I'm not criticizing the idea or the spirit of the system, right? I'm criticizing, kind of the pragmatic way how the Christianity, for example, practiced the kind of the way how they ruled the thinking process, right? So in a way, it used to be, and I think it's still kind of dogmatic in a way, but it doesn't mean that I would say that all the Christianity is kind of dogmatic. This is kind of part of the institution. Look, I can see that in many other like in academia, right? So there is a lot of fantastic ideas and so on, but then the institution like CERN, the big institution, they have the tendency to create some big bodies which are so rigid that it's impossible to change, for example, the direction or something like that. So, and they are following kind of some tracks which are kind of defined by some political circles. It's not that, it doesn't mean that I'm saying that that everything is bad, but
No.
there are tendencies which kind of have this, ability to block, for example, the progress in some directions.
Yes, I believe
Right.
it's a question of how deep you go. Like this quote, which probably comes from Werner Heisenberg, that if you just take a small nip from the glass of science, you become an atheist. But if you drink it fully, you find God at the bottom of the glass. And I think this is also true for religion or for spirituality. If you approach religion or spirituality superficially, you will end up with a very simple answer on the big questions of life. But if you deeply drink fully from the glass of spirituality, you're going very deep within your own consciousness and experience, then you will probably end up at the same place than drinking the glass which science offers you. And I think it's all about not being superficial, not accepting the simple answers, but going very deep and always staying open. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Jan. So I will now introduce another guest who is with us and who is not with us. It's our host, actually. This Wealth of Consciousness is organized as a joint venture by the Existential Consciousness Research Institute here in Berlin and the Dev Sanskriti University, which is situated between Haridwar and Rishikesh. And we have some greeting words from the Pro-Vice Chancellor of this university, Dr. Chinmay Pandya, who, due to many responsibilities, today is a full moon. This always has some holidays in India involved. So he recorded on his travelings through Maharashtra a message to us, which we now can listen to.
Chair of the event, Honorable Professor Marcus, who, apart from being a very close and dear friend of the Gayatri Parivar, is also one of the most learned, devoted, and inspiring leaders of a very unique tradition of science and spirituality working together. So to him and all my brothers and sisters from different parts of the world, good afternoon to all of you and my respectful pranams from India. First of all, allow me to convey our heartfelt congratulations to Professor Marcus for a very successful and pristine beginning of this exceptional congregation. With his pioneering institution, a wonderful institution, we have cherished a very long, I would say a decade long, a strong and affectionate bond. And the news of this auspicious start on a very sacred day brings earnest happiness to our hearts, and we now look forward to continue providing all the possible supports to him to strengthen his academic endeavor even further. The theme that he has chosen for today's event is so pertinent and so timely, most wonderful. But before I dwell further on the subject, allow me to say few words on the contemporary circumstances which are most extraordinary. And I'm trying to send this message to you in those exceptional circumstances from the lap of Ma Ganga, foothills of mighty Himalayas. We are surrounded by them. And from Shantikunj, which is the headquarter of Gayatri Parivar with 150 million members all across the globe. So these historic times in which I'm trying to send the message to you, and you know that we are witnessing a shift in the global consciousness because of a colossal pandemic and this travesty that has been momentous and ever seen by the mankind. And when we attempt to evaluate the current times in the background of such calamity, then the present times could easily be called as unprecedented. And in such times, the significance of the divine possibility that wisdom tradition offers and the significance of what we aim to accomplish through today's congregation, it becomes of utmost significance more than ever before. And when we try to think about the spiritual dimension of the consciousness, then the way I see it is that our hunt, and when I say our, I'm referring to the humanity. So our hunt as humanity together for perfection is coming from a deep instinct to discover an eternal and absolute and timeless truth. And that comes along with a desire to manifest the fullness of my hidden possibilities. Because I believe that deep down, each of us is trying to search for an eternal and final freedom. And without reaching to a higher consciousness, the life continues to give us a feeling of imperfection and incompletion. Somehow, there is a feeling that something is missing. Because without knowing who I really am and what my purpose is in this vast existence, then everything that I do appears to be unfulfilling and futile. So naturally, the question comes that why this task of knowing who I really am is so difficult. Ideally, it should have been an effortless task. No one needs to tell a flower to be a flower or a dog to be a dog. Then why on earth human beings need to be gently cajoled towards embracing the humanity? After all, every other being in the universe appears to be in sync with its existence. We, on the other hand, seem to have lost our internal compasses. Our emotions and identities are frequently in conflict, clouded, fragmented. It is therefore right to ask that why we have lost our integrity. Why do we feel so divided? Why do we suffer so much with this internal conflict? And finding the answer to that question would take us to the spiritual dimension of the consciousness. Because I believe that one of the major reasons for our failure to attain an inner congruence and harmony is caused by the world that we are born into. Because our inner aspirations and the expectations of the world from us, they do not seem to be aligned together. It seems that world does not want us to be what we are born to be. Look at the ideals that society parades in front of us. And look at the way those ideals are enforced upon each and every individual, so that most of us would always be doomed to live dissatisfaction because we are not that person. And along with an obsession of what I should be, while being completely unaware of the fact what I was born to be. Knowing what I was born to be is a transformation of the consciousness. And I'm trying to run after a very pseudo and fake identity. So, apart from a split personality, a fractured self, and a very unhappy individual, what else such an obsession can offer? The first step in the journey of finding peace within takes place by the transformation of the human consciousness. And the reason I use the word consciousness is because what I just talked about, everyone is aware of it and everyone is desperate to find a solution. But unfortunately, our efforts are focusing only on the external measures, like changing the law, changing the regulation, changing the acts, which are important, but they cannot bring a total transformative change unless there is a change in the mindset. The change that I talk about is not the one that happens if I change externally, like I change my clothes or I dye my hair or I get tattooed, but it is the substantive change in our personalities that Gurdev mentioned as global transformation of consciousness. And I believe it is important to, when I mention Gurdev, Pandit Shyam Sharma Acharya, it is important to mention what he did. He was such a prolific scholar of modern India that he wrote more than 3,000 books in Hindi and Sanskrit. Imagine that. And also started a revolutionary movement called Thought Transformation Movement, Vichar Kranti Abhiyan, which now has more than millions of members and thousands of centers worldwide. And he talked about inner transformation, Atmanirman, as the key to change the consciousness of the world. It is important to quote what he said on the current circumstances, and that he was writing in 1987. He said that while the current circumstances they look dark and gloomy, they should not bring fear or despair to us. Rather, we should embrace them like a call of action, because they are a sign. They are a sign that we are born at a time when entire mankind is called to accomplish a completely new level of collaboration between different nations, races, religions, sectors, society. For the first time in the history, all the people of the world are called to accomplish that they never accomplished before, which is to work together as one single family. And to accomplish that, you need to have a refined, elevated, higher consciousness. And at the end, as Professor Marcus has asked me to do, I would like to say a Rigvedic prayer that I have chosen for today's auspicious event. And this prayer is the cornerstone of dharmic traditions and also the founding philosophy of our organization called Gayatri Parivar. So this is the mantra of Gayatri that I would do. It is addressed to Ma Gayatri, who is the creator of the universe, giver of the life. And we ask her to guide us to the Sanmarg, which means the righteous, illumined path. And after doing the mantra of Gayatri, I would like to do the Shanti mantra or Shanti prayer of Yajurveda. Shanti means peace, and this prayer is asking for peace and harmony to radiate all over the universe, on this land and in the skies beyond, in the water, in the herbs, in the trees, and all in the manifestations of the nature. So I will do the Gayatri mantra followed by the mantra peace, Shanti mantra. Om Bhurvubhuva Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dheyo Yo Nah Prachodayat. Dyo Shantihirantahariksha Shanti Prithave Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shantirvishve Deva Shantirbrahma Shanti Sarvagvam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sama Shantiredhe Om Shanti 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 Sarvarishta Sushantir Bhavatu. My best wishes to all of you for a very successful and pleasant end of this congregation. Best wishes to all of you for taking part, and pranams again from India.
Chinmay, for this wonderful greetings. And yes, it was my personal wish. I asked Dr. Pandya if at the end of whatever he will speak about, he can give us an idea about, or actually make us participate into this very ancient practice of the repetition of the Gayatri mantra. I remember when I was initiated as a monk, I also was initiated in this mantra, which basically focuses the intention to the origin of consciousness, which externally appears as the sun in the sky, but the same sun shines within us, and it emanates consciousness to pervade each cell of our body and to actually allow us to experience this world. So that's a very, very beautiful practice, which is practiced there at the Dev Sanskriti University's campus at the feet of the Himalaya, where each academic lesson is started with this meditation on being consciousness and being connected to the source of consciousness. And it's also ended, and it's focusing our attention that we as an individual spark of consciousness, almost sometimes feeling very much lost in this world, in the waves of material nature, that we actually very much connected with the source of consciousness. And this is something which is probably the most deepest message of all these spiritual traditions. And I believe science is on the way to discover the same truth. So on this way, we are on an historic journey, and I hope, David, you have overcome some parts of your...
Well, can you hear me now?
Oh yes, finally, such a relief. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to your presentation on the Galileo Commission.
Right, thank you very much. I can actually hear an echo at the moment, which is not great, but I'll just continue. Good. It's gone. Yes, good afternoon, evening, everybody, depending on where you are. My name's David Lorimer. I'm the chair of the Galileo Commission, and I'm going to give you this talk about an invitation to look through the telescope. Right.
Yes.
Okay, so I was just talking about Max Planck and reading this through. So I'll just go to the end of it. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind, which is what we've been talking about. The mind is the matrix of all matter. Here is Galileo looking through his telescope, probably at the moons of Jupiter, and he wrote to Kepler to say that here at Padua is the principal professor of philosophy, and we're not talking about cardinals here, we're talking about a professor of philosophy, whom I've repeatedly and urgently requested to look at the moon and the planets through my glass, which he pertinaciously refuses to do. Notice the pertinaciously, obstinate. And why did he not do this? Because he already knew that he didn't need to do that because of the authority of Aristotle. And Aristotle hadn't mentioned this, and so it couldn't be true. And so what we've got at the moment is a modern science that has developed a public image of unchallengeable authority. and a sense of establishment and infallibility. And this is a physicist who's a Royal Society fellow. Now, the aims of the Galileo Commission is we're trying to bring together what Dean Rading calls advanced consciousness researchers around a report written by Harold Wallach, a very rigorous report, and Harold was on the call earlier. And this means expanding the acceptable evidence base for science of consciousness. I just wanted to read you a quote from somebody who's taken a lot of stick recently, called Alvy Noel. And he says this: "It is not obvious to me why extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Extraordinary conservatism keeps us extraordinarily ignorant." And I thought that was a powerful statement against Carl Sagan, who made that, who first put that forward. So what my point here in this last bullet point is that consciousness can give us direct access to the deeper structures of reality. And this is what is argued by Harold in the report, and hence deepen our understanding of the nature of consciousness and reality. And this is done in the Western terminology. This is gnosis, or non-dual perception, which is this deep experience that we've been talking about, the kind of connectedness and connection, and what's actually love in action that Brenda is talking about. So we're having some further Galileo Commission summits later in the year. The next one is April the 9th to the 10th for the launch of Expanding Science, which is the AAPS, the Academy for the Advancement of Post-Materialist Sciences. It's their next volume. And we'll also be launching the Consciousness Unbound, which is the new volume, third volume from Irreducible Mind and Beyond Physicalism from Ed Kelly at the University of Virginia. I just want to say a few words about metaphysics and science, because all science is in fact based on metaphysics, even if they deny such a connection, as Harold points out in his report. And that some of the pioneers in this were Alfred Russel Wallace, and then his essay, No Antecedent Improbability and Miracles from 1870. And he demolishes Hume's essay on miracles in extremely amusing ways. I highly recommend that. And then F.C.S. Schiller from Oxford, his book, 1991 book, Riddles of the Sphinx. William James, his Ingersoll Lecture on Immortality, which is only 7,000 words, absolutely essential reading. And I'll tell you why in the next slide. E.A. Burt, his Metaphysical Foundations of Modern Science, 1925, out of Yale. This is an absolutely seminal book and led to Willis Harman's work on new metaphysical foundations of modern science, 70 years later. And two other key people were A.N. Whitehead, who was both a fellow of the Royal Society and a fellow of the British Academy. And his book, Science in the Modern World, that's 1925, actually, in Process and Reality. So Whitehead has a huge contribution still to make for people who can penetrate his prose. But this process and pan-experientialism, as he calls it, is extremely important. Then Robin Collingwood, he was professor of metaphysical philosophy at Oxford. He wrote Essay on Metaphysics in 1940, and I'm just going to talk about that a little bit. So what he was trying to do was to counter the arguments of the logical positivists and the Vienna Circle, and particularly of A.J. Ayer, who published his Language, Truth and Logic in 1936 at the age of 24, which is quite a feat. He later said it was all wrong, but unfortunately it's still influential. So Collingwood says the answer to any question presupposes whatever the question presupposes. And because all science begins with a question, for the question is logically prior to its own answer, all science begins with a presupposition. Now, this is the key point to note. All science begins with a presupposition. And hence, presuppositions are actually inescapable. And even if working scientists don't realize this, because they've done no philosophy of science and no history of science, it should be compulsory for scientists to understand how scientific ideas were arrived at. So what he says is to attack metaphysics is actually to attack the foundations of science in terms of logic and reasoning that derive from philosophy. So it's a kind of argument for the primacy of philosophy in terms of epistemology and knowledge. Feynman famously said, this used to be quoted by Willis Harman, philosophy of science is what to scientists what ornithology is to birds. Of course, birds don't know anything about ornithology. They just get on with flying. And so scientists feel they just want to get on with doing science rather than being bothered with these questions, these technical questions about the status of their knowledge and their approach. And so you can see that how does the brain generate consciousness, which is the so-called hard problem of David Chalmers, actually contains in it the presupposition or assumption that the brain does in fact generate consciousness. Well, as William James pointed out over 100 years ago, and this is only one of 3 possible models of how the consciousness and the brain are related. Either, he said, this is in the Ingersoll lecture, it produces consciousness, or it transmits it, or it permits a certain types of consciousness to come through. And this is the so-called filter theory, which you'll find developed in considerable detail in Beyond Physicalism. So the thing is that in neuroscience and psychology and philosophy, and in fact throughout the academe, this assumption the brain generates consciousness is almost universal and it's unquestioned. So the Galileo Commission report actually challenges this assumption, as have many people in history, the people I mentioned in the previous slide on metaphysics and science. And it's very important, crucial really, to do this because when you look at the evidence, this wider evidence base of consciousness, of out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, and so on, you can't begin to explain this from the point of view that the brain gives rise to consciousness. It just simply doesn't work. So this, back to the telescope, as I say here, so the assumption that the brain produces consciousness, as William James pointed out, it's consistent with all the sort of normal research. And in many areas of research projects, you wouldn't need to make that distinction. But when it comes to the more subjective and qualitative side, then you have to take this into account. And what's happened, what the situation we have now is that mainstream scientists, philosophers, psychologists, so they just won't look through the telescope to see, look at evidence. This is evidence-based here, that might call into question the adequacy of scientific materialism or scientism as a worldview. And we have a conference called Beyond the Brain, which is in the links, and you'll see at the end. And we have that's coming up in November, first weekend in November. And the people who are researching actively in this area, such as Rupert Sheldrake, they're attacked and vilified and called pseudoscientists. And these unfortunately these skeptics are actually pseudo-skeptics because they're not interested in just doubting and trying to understand something more profoundly. They claim they're defending science and reason. I'm also defending science and reason, but I'm defending it from a wider point of view. So Wikipedia is completely corrupted in all the coverage of parapsychology and people who have pages connected with it, and also complementary medicine. So it claims to be an authoritative source, but there are 90 guerrilla skeptics working to control these pages. It should be revealed. It should be put out into the mainstream media. But the trouble is, that most of the mainstream journalists are themselves the same kind of skeptics. Now, this is a very important logical point to understand, that there are no impossible facts. If something happens, then it's possible. So A.R. Wallace, he puts this brilliantly. He says, to put the matter in a simple form, and this is in one of his essays, the asserted fact is either possible or not possible. If possible, such evidence as we've been considering would prove it. And if not possible, such evidence could not exist. And this just demolishes the idea that you can explain away a fact as not being possible. the problem, as Larry Deshan points out, impossible events do not occur, is not with the event, it's with the theory. So if your theory cannot explain what it is that you're looking at, you have to change the theory and not deny the fact. This is just a crucial point to understand and something to use in your kind of armory of arguments in this area. And Leshan, who just died, he says this: the danger is we accept our definition of reality as a fact when it's in fact a theory. So if you've got a violation of your theory, then you have to revise your theory rather than ignore the facts. And Jeff Kripal has been discussing this recently in his book, The Flip, and about impossible experiences. And he gives various examples, such as precognitive examples, Mark Twain's experience, and so on, which you can't just say they didn't happen. And if they did happen, then you have to address how they could possibly have happened in terms of your overall metaphysical view or world view. So if you dismiss these things, then you're missing their significance. So what we're moving towards, I think, here is an evidence-based spirituality. And these are just some of the research areas which many of you will be very familiar with. And I think that the NDE is in fact a form of initiation or gnosis, where you can become one with the ultimate light and love, of which we are all expressions, which Brenda was referring to. And then you've got the Children Remember Previous Lives, the Department of Perceptual Studies. And so my argument is that the eye of contemplation provides valid access to these deeper structures and levels of reality. So we have to add the eye of contemplation and gnosis to reason and sense as ways of arriving at a deeper understanding of reality. And the Greeks knew this already. Even Aristotle actually knew it. My colleague Athena Patari can give you chapter and verse for that. So we need an expanded ontology and epistemology and new methodologies such as we find in contemplative neuroscience. I just want to dwell on this slide for a moment. I ran out of time this morning, because the image of the human being, what a human being is very, very critical at this time, and especially as the fourth industrial revolution is being pushed through during the lockdown. There's an enormous number of satellites have been launched for 5G. The Internet of Things is coming with the 5G. And with that, huge capacities for surveillance, as many of you will be familiar. So are we just complex biological machines, or do we have a spiritual essence? This is a crucial question to ask. And are we heading for a technotopic transhumanism, where you get your consciousness uploaded into the cloud, which is also a denial of the body, or a human-centered post-materialism? This is the work of an Australian futurist who talks about this. So how do we maintain the integrity of the human in relation to this rapid technological advance? And I just want to mention this quote from Michael Eschliman, which is The Abolition of the Restitution of Man. It's a brilliant book from about 20 years ago. And he says the ultimate effect of scientism is to dissolve the absolute qualitative distinction between persons and things. So everything becomes third-person object. The very heart of the metaphysical tradition of sapientia, that's what is being abolished, reducing persons to things, denying humans' rational soul and their transcendence of the physical, giving us a value, or giving him a value no higher than that of a camel or a stone or any part of nature. So this image of the human being, in the future idea of the human being in a transpersonal sense. So do we want transhumanism or the transpersonal? I vote for the transpersonal myself. And so we need a multidimensional model of the human being, with meaning and values incorporated in sapientia as well as scientia. Now, as part of the Galileo Commission, I've done a series of podcasts called Imaginal Inspirations, from the time when the caterpillar disintegrates and the butterfly is formed inside. And this is the period we're in at the moment. I think that we're in a meltdown period. But the future is open, and we're at a critical point where we need to self-organize to a sufficient extent to maintain our own freedom and integrity as human beings, and emerge as a butterfly rather than a squashed caterpillar. So you can see the kind of people who are on my podcast, Elizabeth Sartorius, Larry Dossi, and these are quite short. And I asked them who influenced them and what are their inspirations. And so you can find that on this link here. Just Google Imaginal Inspirations. And then, just for your interest, I have a book of essays coming out next month called A Quest for Wisdom. So it's 25 essays on a huge variety of topics, including consciousness, spirituality, meaning, death, transformation, and then ethics and society as well. So if you go to Aeon Books, AEON, then you'll find that. I should get some hard copies next week. So here are the websites, the Galileo Commission .org, where you can find the report and the summaries and the lay version, which Hans has just has translated into German. And then Scientific Medical Network. Our webinars are at mysticsandscientists.org, our Beyond the Brain conference there, and then these are other ones that I'm sure we can share these slides with you. So thank you very much indeed for your attention, and apologies for the interruptions.
Oh, no, wonderful. Thank you, David, to take us on this journey, to show us the historical dimension of what we are talking about, and also for giving this two options, the transhumanism and the transpersonalism. So the decision which we as humans have to make, and also as societies, which way we want to go, that it's really a critical time in which we are living, and that it's us who really makes a difference. So thank you very much for your part, and don't worry about the technical problems.
Okay, good.
So this means we are still human. We didn't achieve the transhumanist goal yet, and we are still human. That's great. Thank you very much. And yes, we see you. Wonderful. Brenda, thank you for being here. You have been also, last time you have been here with us in our Global Consciousness Day, and just like to introduce you shortly. You were from the beginning until now taking part in one of the most amazing research projects about consciousness influencing or intention influencing physical processes, which originally was developed by Professor Robert Jahn at the Princeton University. And last time you told us a little about the history, which has many interesting anecdotes. But I think the conclusion, and even when I was a student, 1984, I was so fascinated by reading about the results of your research. Maybe today you can talk a little about what is your conclusions from this research, and also talk a little about how we as an individual consciousness are connected to each other. And I'm also very much interested in what you think about universal consciousness.
Right. Well, our topic today is the connectedness of consciousness. And I might start by noting that it's true that science has given us many wonderful tools for acquiring new knowledge. Sometimes those tools are not sufficient. As they say, they're necessary but not sufficient. I liked David's observation about how we might have direct access to the deeper reaches of reality. And we have seen this afternoon or this evening, as the time may be, that our technology is not the sole way, the sole means by which we can find connectedness. That is something that is much deeper and much more profound. In the years that we did our research at PAIR, we found that although intention was an important component of the experimental results, there was something else that was very important, something that we termed resonance. And it is something we heard from many of the people who did our experiments. They told us that they needed to feel a connection to the device they were working on. They needed to become emotionally involved in the process. That is, the examples frequently that were given were like a musician with his instrument, or a person in their car. But that's something I'd like to address, that sense of resonance, whereby we are able to connect not only with machines, but with each other, more importantly, and with the grander reality, the deeper reality, as David put it, that we have access to. We're all part of that. It's like a magnificent jewel, a diamond, perhaps. Each one of us as individuals are like one facet of that diamond. And if we keep that facet clean and shiny and bright, we're able to somehow or other recognize that we are only one piece of the big picture. And that is where the resonance comes in, because when we can recognize that we're just one piece of the picture, just as we might imagine being one cell in an organism, that one cell is not the organism, but it is an intrinsic part of the organism. And when it is functioning at its best, the organism is healthier. This is the goal of a connected consciousness. We find that when people are in resonance with each other, when there's a group of people together sharing an emotionally moving experience, when they're all, if you will, on the same wavelength, I love that expression, then somehow or other the randomness in the environment is slightly reduced. That we were able to measure with our scientific instruments. We were able to see a slight increase in the order, in the structure of a random process that was somehow involved or part of this unified experience. This is, I think, in many ways the most important insight that we were able to glean from our PAIR studies. Namely, that we are more than just an individual. Yes, we are individuals. Yes, we have egos. The ego is necessary. It maintains the integrity of the organism. But if we allow the ego to drive, so to speak, then we lose track of that other side of ourselves that is connected to the greater being, the greater diamond, if you will. And many traditions, East and West, talk about how we need to put the ego aside. We don't want to destroy it. We just want to get it out of the driver's seat and into the passenger seat, and let the greater consciousness, the consciousness that is connected with everything, become drive the process. The experiments that Roger Nelson carried out with the Global Consciousness Network also provided some valuable insight into how, when there are huge groups of people who are all sharing an emotional experience, even though they may be separated by thousands of miles from each other, they too, that connectedness that they are sharing can also affect the orderliness of random processes. We know that almost everything around us is random. And we can look at it not only in scientific processes, in psychology, but I think one of the more interesting ones is in biology, because we came to realize that if there is one place where connectedness and resonance and intention can somehow make a small shift in a random distribution, it might be in biology. It might be in the process of evolution, that when a species has a desire to evolve, or at least when a large number of participants of that species are sharing that, it can perhaps change the random pattern that is going on. The effects tended to be small, and I think the effects we can have on the global consciousness are very small, but they can build up to a statistically significant effect over many repetitions. And so when we get together, as we have today, with many people on the same wavelength, with many people holding a similar intention, perhaps that can affect the global consciousness. That of which we are a part. I'm sorry about that. Once again, we have communication issues, but at least the computer is working now. I found that rather significant, that here we were having these problems with connectedness on a technical level, but that isn't all there is. There is this connectedness at a deep level, at a heart level. And we should work towards that. We are going through a major transition in the cosmos, certainly on our planet, and most assuredly in our social structure. And if we can manage to hold on to a positive intention driven by a sense of connectiveness and love, I think we can make a difference. I think we can move things in a direction that's more positive, more loving, more sharing, beginning to recognize ourselves not only as individuals, but as part of something bigger. This is the ultimate goal, to feel connected to the universe, to feel ourselves as an expression of the universe, as a representation of the universe, as it goes through its changes, its yin and its yang dancing together, and creating whatever reality happens to be, which of course is very dependent on the reality we're looking for. So I can only speak from a very modest set of data that indicate that it works. But I think that's important. In science, people talk a lot about statistics, and everything is determined whether something is positive or negative in terms of the statistics. But statistics can tell us only one thing. It can tell us whether or not something happened. Statistics can't tell us what happened. It can't tell us how it happened. It can't tell us why it happened. But I can tell you with some confidence, with statistical confidence, that something did happen and something is happening. And we're all part of it. And as long as we continue to see ourselves as part of it, we contribute to it in a positive way. I'm not sure there's much more I can say on that topic. I think perhaps my time is probably up, isn't it, Marcus? But
actually, I was so much listening to you that I didn't look at the time at all. But I like to ask you a question, as you have so much experience dealing with this consciousness, and what do you personally do to reconnect or to feel or be connected to the other fellow beings?
Over the years, I've developed a lot of different techniques and processes that seem to work. But after a while, they tend to get a little bit automatic, But one thing I find myself doing these days is I have a little ritual when I start my day in which I direct my attention in four ways: to the four quarters, to the four seasons, to the four basic elements of earth, air, fire, and water. I never could keep track of all the others on the chart. Those four are the ones that are important. But in attempting to identify with these quadrants and feel a part of it, it gives me a good start to my day, recognizing that I am something bigger than whatever that part of me is that's going to go down and feed the cat and make breakfast and take the garbage out. And I try to keep that in mind as I go through my day, thinking in terms, even just watching the different times of the day, the mornings, the afternoons, the evenings, the nights, and how each of these connects with a different element, with a different direction, and with a different state of mind. We have our heads, we have our analytical self, we have our emotional self, we have our social self. But all of these are simply ways of looking at the greater self that is not just the individual, but is part of the bigger picture. So I just try to keep that in mind. I don't, other than this little morning ritual, it's just something that I try to carry with me. I was going to say, if I do tend to lose track of that, I might take a little bit of time to meditate and just quiet down the noise in my head.
I like your spontaneous answer. You meditate about your meditation on the fourness, because many years ago, when I really experienced lots of joy studying the work of Carl Gustav Jung, I learned that he saw whenever the symbol of fourness comes up, it's a symbol for the unity to manifest, for the self to manifest. So I even think that the progress within science, which is going on right now, it's a transition from a dualistic logic to a four-valued logics. So I find it everywhere. The symbolism of four, which seems to be somehow connected also in the Jungian psychology with the appearance of the archetype of the self, which probably is the all connectedness and the evolution towards wholeness.
I've read a lot of Jung's work, but I missed that one. I find that personally very meaningful. I was going to make another point, except it just slipped my mind. I apologize.
Oh, don't worry.
No. I was going to. You were speaking of science. Bob and I wrote a paper many years ago that we called toward a science of the subjective, in which we pointed out that science cannot proceed any further than it already has gone until it is able to incorporate consciousness, the subjective side of experience, into its picture of reality. What it does now, it describes reality, it counts it, it quantifies it, it graphs it, but all it is doing is describing something that is experienced in a very subjective way. And we have to learn as scientists to bring about a complementarity between this analytical side and the experiential side in order to see the whole picture that we're looking at. One of my favorite hero in modern physics is Niels Bohr, because he brought out the concept of complementarity. It helped us to, or gave us a clue anyway, how, we might shift from a dualistic view of the world to a holistic one, a view where the inside and the outside are just two perspectives on the oneness. Anyway.
Thank you. Thank you, Branda. Stay with us. I think we have the chance now to come to the second part of our journey, which turns to be more and more practical. So the next speaker, I hope you are there, Christian, already. Yes.
Yes, I'm here, Markus.
Hi, Christian. So many of our participants know you already from different events which we had, and you're known as a very practical man. So you have always put your thoughts and what you are into practice by being an entrepreneur in the past, but especially also now with your vegetarian and vegan restaurants, which you started from Vienna and now expanding into other places. And we really want to know from you how you do it. So your contribution about positive action is really very relevant. So it's your time.
Thank you very much, Markus, for the introduction and the possibility to share my view and experiences with positive thoughts and positive actions. I think in the current time, it's even more relevant to see the positive opportunities. So what I would like to talk about today is first about the idea of living the highest vision of yourself. Then how can you do that? I think it's a good idea to increase your vibration and positivity. Let's see how we can do that. And then, we built some positive habits around that. And then the question is, why do we forget to stay in this connection? So let's start. Well, the highest vision of yourself, why is that important? First of all, you need something as a measurement stick where you can see something is positive or negative, and also what can be more positive for your life than the highest vision you have for yourself. So the first thing is to ask yourself the question, what is the highest vision of yourself? And it's good to really dream about your highest vision, to think wide and think about many possibilities. And if you think that big, it can happen that you ask yourself, is this really possible for me? Can I lead such a life? And there are sometimes in life we have difficult situations, and they usually viewed as not so nice. But at the same time, they are a possibility for becoming open for change. Because sometimes we need suffering in different areas of our life to be open for change, because we don't want to continue the way it is. So you can use these difficulties also to start thinking about these possibilities and hoping and believing it is possible. So what do you need then to make it really possible? And here we come to the second part. When you increase your own vibration and energy and positivity, then you have a higher chance to live this big vision of yourself. And what can you do? First you need to see the positive opportunity, because you cannot decide for something that you are not aware of. So you need to first become aware of the positive options you have. And then, of course, you need to act according to that, to bring it into your life. So what can we do to increase the positive opportunities that we can see in our life? The first thing is to be thankful for the present moment. I mean, it's not by accident called the present moment. So it's a gift that we have in this moment. And in a difficult situation, you might think, things are negative and you're limited, but just assume at least that there are positive opportunities and positive possibilities. That already brings you more inner peace, which is a good basis for connecting with a higher vibration. Then ask, for example, what are the positive options in this situation? And to really get good answers, it's important that you stay open, because how can you block your own wisdom by believing you already have it. So it's good to forget about what you think you know and you think about what's right or wrong, but just stay open as possible. But because then the maybe surprising positive opportunities can be realized. And then you connect to a higher being by going into your inner silence, into your inner peace, and become aware of what's coming out of this stillness in yourself. And when there is a message coming with this feeling of knowledge, inner knowledge, you just know this is right and this is true, then you got a message from your inner wisdom. And usually when this is something really new, it comes with more questions. So if this, then what? So the next step is to kind of have an inner dialogue and ask again, ask as long as needed, so that also your mind has a clear understanding of what these positive possibilities are and what are the next steps and so on. And these 4 steps help you to just see the positive opportunities that are there in your life right now. And when you find such possibilities, then it's your responsibility to act on that. And it's your opportunity to act on that. You don't need to, but you can. So at the end, seeing the positive opportunities is the first step. What can we do to increase this way of living, this positive thinking and so on? Well, ask yourself, where is your focus in life right now? Is it more on the left side, which looks like a chess board, which kind of looks more like limitation and rules? Or is it more on the right side, which is a chaos fractal, which looks more like the real life? So is your focus more on the limitations that you see and experience? Or is it more on the many positive opportunities that are also there? Like in the fractal, everything is everywhere. So the positive opportunities are also in this current situation right now. And to see these opportunities, you can build some habits. For example, you can nourish yourself with positive beliefs about yourself and about life in general. And a good time for doing that is just when you fall asleep. Just before you fall asleep, take some beliefs, positive beliefs about you into your sleep, because then they have the most effect. They go very deep. And these beliefs that you have, they act like a filter. So maybe you experienced when you thought about the situation, then similar situations come into your mind more easily. So if you have these positive beliefs about yourself, you will have easier time to find the positive thoughts in you. And whatever the circumstances are that you are currently in, they might be easy, they might be difficult, whatever. But what really matters is your reaction to the circumstances. And your reaction is based on your state of being. And if it's a positive state of being, your reaction will also be more positive and the results will also be according to that. So keep a positive state of mind. And what is always helpful, to be fully present in the moment. This can be done through breathing. Just breathe deep in and then slowly exhale, which increases your energy and awareness. And observe your breath, your feelings, your thoughts, because you are not those things, but you are the observer, the consciousness behind. And so when you meditate each day to practice this detachment, then it's more easier to see the things from a neutral position and easier to see the positive thoughts, positive options. So why do we still then forget to stay connected? In my own life, I experienced that this works very beautifully, and it worked very often and very magical in my life. But still, I realize that I have a time where I feel very connected and very clear. And then there are times where I lose this connection. And I asked myself, why is this possible? Why is this happening? And the answer I got is, I'm probably distracted by my perception, And then the next perception comes and I'm distracted further and further. So the thing is, you need to remember the origin, which is your inner connection to this stillness, to this wisdom in you. And there you will find yourself. And you can view it like a tree. So the stem of the tree is like when you are really connected, when you are really in your middle. And then the branches of the tree are like the different possibilities of perceptions that you have. And if you go back to this trunk, you can also turn it around. Then you are kind of connected with your inner spirit, with your higher spirit, with God, with your higher being, with this higher vibration. And so you remember, when you remember this God in you, so to speak, then you remember the origin. And so it's about finding the God in you, because we are always connected. And whatever name you choose, you can say, find the God in you, find the Krishna in you, find the Christ in you, find the Buddha in you, the Allah, or the love, or the wisdom, or the source. And if you're connected, then it's much easier to find these positive thoughts and positive options, because out of this higher wisdom, you already know these options. And then it's easier and obvious to speak and to act positive. So in summary, what are our options? We have some possibilities that are, kind of the long-term basis for enabling this process. And there are some options we have for the moment, here and now, and some are in between. So when you strive for the highest vision of yourself, then use the possibilities to increase your positivity and vibration by, first of all, nourish and hold the positive beliefs that you have about you. And one of the beliefs could be the assumption that, yes, I believe there is a positive opportunity right now in this situation, whatever it is, wherever you are, even if it doesn't look like that in the first view. By keeping a positive state in all kinds of situations, you are there for reacting in the best possible way. And this search for the positive possibilities is best done by your inner stillness, inner connection, higher being. And since you are always connected with this inner source, with your higher self, with God, whatever you name it, with love, with wisdom, use this connection and ask and be guided by that. That's the easiest way to see, even in difficult situations, what are the positive options you have. So I can just tell you from my own life experience, whenever I did that, my life went really in flow and smooth and positive. And when I forgot that, and sometimes I did forget it, I really started to struggle with something that otherwise would be easy. And then I come back to these ideas, to this connection, and then things start to flow again. So I invite all of you to just use what you have. You have this inner light in yourself. Just use it and be guided to positive actions. Thank you very much.
I think you gave a very, very deep insight into the world of inner consciousness, because inside we are not ourselves, we are not alone ourselves, but there we meet. Basically, we meet the supreme consciousness. You gave different options how to call this consciousness, but it's so important to be connected, and we will always, again, because we are humans, maybe temporarily lose this connection, but then to reconnect. It's so practical, and this was really like the yoga of action, because it's so important to express our consciousness and our deep connection in what we do in this world, so that we can make a contribution. So I very much like this practical yoga which you showed. And this is also something which connects to our next speaker. Very, very happy to have Chris Besh again with us. Chris, you chose a very interesting topic about the contagiousness of consciousness, and I think this would be a good news if, by having a very by working on our own consciousness, we can actually spread it. It's better than spreading a virus. But anyway, before coming to your contribution, I like to introduce you shortly. So those who don't know you yet, I think in your lifetime you have been a real academic, making very nice academic contributions in pedagogic. I don't know what's the English word for it, but I read a few books of you. For example, the big book on reincarnation, which is a wonderful comprehension of all the scientific research which is there for reincarnation nowadays. So that reading your book, it really gets you gets one to the conviction that there is so much evidence for reincarnation that it has to be accepted as a scientific fact almost. Like it's a telescope through which many people just don't want to look. But that's not your only contribution. But I think what you consider your main contribution is related to your own journey within through the help of psychedelic substances, especially LSD, which you're describing in 2 books. Your book, Dark Night, Early Dawn, is one of the most fascinating, has been one of the most fascinating books for me to read ever. And I don't know how much you talked about this today, so I don't want to take too much of your time, Chris.
Thank you, Marcus. Yeah, I think there are many telescopes in the modern world, and I think psychedelics is one of the most important telescopes to look through, because my understanding of psychedelics is that they are essentially amplifiers of consciousness. It's been said, Stan Grof said, that psychedelics are to astronomy what the telescope is to astronomy and the microscope is to biology. It amplifies consciousness, and it amplifies it so powerfully that it brings so much new data into our awareness that it forces us to create new theories in order to understand the data. So basically, I think most of the people on this episode would understand and remember what my story is. I've been an academic in Ohio. I was a professor of religious studies, but that's not what brought me here today. My core work behind the scenes was I worked systematically with LSD very conscientiously over a 20-year period. So while I was in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies, surrounded by people who were espousing the materialist philosophy that David Lorimer described so effectively, I was having experiences that all my colleagues thought were impossible. It's just not possible to experience what I was experiencing. And I just kept my mouth shut, and I kept exploring, and I kept going through this series over 20 years, doing about 4 or 5 sessions a year, going deeper and deeper and deeper into levels of communion with the universe that were changing the course of my life. And I was experiencing informational downloads from what I experienced to be straight from the universe itself that was just giving me a radically different understanding of how reality is put together and how it works. And I've written up this story in this book, LSD and the Mind of the Universe, which I've talked with this organization about. But what I'd like to talk with you about today comes out of this research, but it's a different story. And that is a story told, I don't know whether this is coming out straight or not, in my book, LSD and the Mind of the Universe. And it is about the contagious quality of consciousness. So here's, in a nutshell, here is basically my thought. I never talked to my students about my psychedelic research, of course. It was illegal when I was doing it, and so I created a barrier. This was my private, personal work that I'd never brought onto campus. I'd never talked to my students about it. But what I found was that over the years, as I went deeper into the consciousness or the mind of the universe and began to experience collective fields of consciousness that were underlying reality and that contained all of reality. As I went deeper into this matrix of consciousness over time, I began to find that my students were being affected by the experiences that I was having in my own personal so-called private work. And the story I tell in the Living Classroom began this way. About 5 years into my teaching career and 4 years after I had been working with psychedelics, students began to come up to me after class and say things like, you know, it's interesting that you use the description, that use the analogy, the metaphor that you did today, because that's exactly what happened to me this week. And then they would tell me this aspect of their life, and it was, in fact, exactly what I had been describing. And in my experience, I simply reached into some imaginary space and just reached and grabbed an example in order to illustrate the point I was making. But in their experience, I was describing their recent experience in great detail. When this first happened, I thought, well, no big deal, it's just a coincidence. But it happened again, and it happened again. And over the years, it became a not unfrequent occurrence in my classroom. When I would just be lecturing, not about psychedelics, not about, just lecturing, and I would be reaching for some example to make some point in my lecture, I would enter a pause, and then I would just be given some kind of example, and I would bring the sample forward in my work, and it began to touch my lives. Information from my students' lives was showing up involuntarily in my lectures. Now, I chose as this topic, I was moved to this topic because the topic for this day's presentation was on consciousness and information fields. So it really becomes the question, the way I understand it, came to understand, is that each of my students were not simply their physical body, but their physical body was centered within their consciousness, and their consciousness was an informational field that contained all the information of their life. And somehow, because of the work that I was doing in my own private life, exploring the deeper dimensions of my own mind, when I would simply teach and entered into a relaxed and creative place, something inside me connected with something inside them that allowed a transmission of information from inside them to enter into my awareness and then to be incorporated into my lecture. This process became such a common feature of my lecture experience that I eventually began to really pay conscious attention. I began to look for signals of student activation. I began to study what was happening. I began to research the science of fields and the science of the contagious quality of consciousness and parapsychology, and eventually wrote this small book, The Living Classroom, in which I don't discuss psychedelics at all, because the issue is not psychedelics. The issue is the nature of consciousness. And it's simply that psychedelics was my telescope for looking deeper into consciousness. But the important point here is my looking deeper began to trigger other people to have deeper experiences of their own consciousness. I began to find that as I went deeper, students' lives were being touched and impacted in very deep and intimate personal ways. These examples that I was drawing from began to touch them in very, very sensitive areas of their life, in some area of their life where they had experienced pain or trauma, in some area of their life where there was a blockage and they needed something in order to take the next step forward in their life. I also found that people began to have very deep experiences of some of the concepts that I was lecturing on. So I would be just teaching a course in world religions or introduction to Buddhism or something like this. And I would be talking about the ideas that Houston Smith calls the perennial tradition, the perennial philosophy, the ideas of the eternal divine within, of reincarnation, or in Buddhism, shunyata, emptiness, nirvana, awakening, so on and so forth. And simply by talking about them and talking about them in a way that reflected my own experience of these realities from my own psychedelic work, but without talking about those experiences, just simply talking about the concepts, I found that people began to have very deep emotional, psychological experiences of these realities. They began to have aha experiences where suddenly what was simply a concept became a living experience for them. And how I came to understand this eventually was that somehow through my own personal work, that work had changed something about me, something in my energy, something, I'm not sure what. But it changed something about me that began to make me become a lightning rod that was eliciting similar experiences in my students among those who were receptive to this influence. And not all were, but some were. Now, there's nothing new in what I'm saying. Spiritual traditions around the world have always known that this happens, have always known that one person's spiritual practice can activate forces in the world which touch the lives of those around them. What is unusual here simply is that this was happening in a secular classroom, in a university environment where these things were not supposed to happen. Because if our consciousness is produced by our brain, and we all have separate brains, then we all have separate minds, and there should be no way in which my mind can have this backdoor access to your mind, or that my life would touch your life in this way. And yet it was happening over and over again. I began to understand and frame this in the language of an energetic resonance. There was an energetic resonance between my being and their being that allowed something to be transmitted from me to them, something that was not simply a transmission of ideas, but it was an energetic transference that was a back and forth, an information flow back and forth, which really was in service of their own development. And this happened not because I was trying to make it happen. It wasn't premeditated on my part. It just happened spontaneously when I wasn't intending it, when I wasn't aware that it was happening. It was just happening. That's what happens. I won't go into it further, but I also came to understand that just as one individual can influence another individual and they can become a living system, that groups of people, when they are focused in common endeavor, when their consciousness is focused on a particular project, that these groups, the intensity, the energy of the field of the group intensifies. And that if you have a classroom or any group, but I'm a teacher, so my work is the classroom. When you have a classroom of people who are working over and over again and trying to understand certain ideas, say, to grasp certain concepts, and if people are coming together week after week, month after month, trying to understand these things, it creates a certain energy around what I would call the learning field. The field of energy for this group is focused on learning. And so these fields become, the learning field of this group is intensified. What I came to understand over time is that the learning of individuals within a classroom was being influenced by the learning field of the group. Not only this present group, but actually all the students who had studied these things with me in years before, in earlier semesters and earlier times. So that around a course, a learning field gathers and gets potentiated. The more students who have studied this course with me over and over again, year by year, these course fields become strengthened and affect the learning of the new students coming into the course at the present time. Now, all of this, of course, was completely unacceptable to my philosophical colleagues. It wasn't part of their reality at all. It's all impossible. But this is, of course, impossible because they weren't looking through my telescope. They weren't willing to look into the telescope, even intellectually. They were not doing their homework on psychedelic research. They were not doing their homework on contemplative prayer. They had a different agenda, and their agenda is that our minds simply reduce to our brains. But of course, as David is showing and as the Galileo Commission is showing, that's simply not adequate. It is not adequate to account for so much data arising in so many fields. Personally, I think psychedelics have an enormous contribution to make, particularly because anybody can look through this telescope. It takes discipline, it takes training, you have to be very careful, you have to work with it consistently, but anybody can look through this telescope. Right now, we're going through a psychedelic renaissance. There is a new resurgence of research on psychedelics, which is wonderful, and this is going to lead to very important breakthroughs down the road. Personally, I think that right now, psychedelics are being used at a very modest level. They're using gentler psychedelics, and they're using them at lower doses, which is in effect looking through the telescope into consciousness, but looking through a lower power telescope. So they're only seeing the nearby layers of the personal unconscious. But this is a very healing thing. When you use lower doses and of a gentler psychedelic like psilocybin, you actually evoke the personal unconscious. And when you do that, you can heal. You can help a person heal from their trauma, from their post-traumatic stress, from their addictive and compulsive disorders. It's a very, very important thing, but it's just the beginning. It's just the overture. The more powerful psychedelics, when used at higher doses in a sustained fashion, go beyond the personal mind, go deep into the collective unconscious that Carl Jung talked about, goes beyond the collective unconscious into the archetypal mind, goes beyond the archetypal mind into the consciousness of the universe itself, goes beyond time into various trans-temporal experiences, goes beyond space into various trans-spatial experiences. And my colleagues say, stop, this is too much. This is impossible. To which I say simply, look through our telescope. Look through the telescope and tell me what you see. What's important is not what any one person sees. What's important is what all of us can see collectively. And then we compare our notes and we begin to sort out what is idiosyncratic and doesn't deserve our attention, and what we are all seeing that is reinforcing into seeing the same thing and that deserves our attention. What's important is our cultures looking through this telescope, more important than any one person looking through this telescope. So I guess that's the gist of what I'd like to say. My experience is that consciousness is changed by these inquiries. And when our consciousness and change, it just ripples out among us in 300. First, our minds always ripple out around us in 360 degrees, always, every day, every night. It's always rippling out around us. But when our consciousness is deeply changed, when it's deeply aligned, as Christian is talking about, to our highest nature, our deeper nature, it spreads out more powerfully and it touches the lives around us, and it allows us to interact with those lives in very deep and profound ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, so much for this amazingly condensed flow of conscious information, I would say. I think every one of us has so many resonances with what you are saying. It so much resonates with our idea of information fields. But I remember in the time when I was a monk, it was so important for us to stay in the association of people who are deeply working on their own spiritual consciousness. It makes such a difference. And also it gives us, it explains why this kind of events, as we are having them today, are so attractive, and they really make a difference because we are connecting to each other. Just see how the chat is activated right now, so that people are really amazed, and they like to share and they like to meet each other. And we are meeting in our collective consciousness right now. We are connecting a few hundred people right now who are connected with so many people. So each little endeavor to deepen our own consciousness will benefit so many people around us. So it's an individual and it's a collective responsibility. Thank you so much, Chris. And this is a very nice introduction to our two yogis, which we have still ahead of us. And the first yogi here is Satchidananda Swami, who will be followed by Eddie Stern. Eddie Stern is a yoga teacher whom I met first time 25 years ago in Manhattan, where he had his yoga center. And Satchidananda Swami I know even longer, since 35 years. And Satchidananda Swami is sharing today with us his decades-long experience about meditation. I know you're right now in the birth process of giving birth to a new book on meditation, which will be very, very practical. So it's your time now.
I thank you very much. It is always a pleasure to address this community which has formed around Healy and Time Waver and is exploring the deeper areas of consciousness. I just wanted to say two things before I start. I have also made an experience of the kind which Chris was talking about in a almost different classroom. I do like to take each year time out where I just meditate for an entire month. You will not find me anywhere else than my particular trees under which I do my meditation. And what I have noted, first, I didn't also pay attention, but I noted that animals would come to me, which are usually very shy or aggressive, and just be very peaceful in my presence as I was meditating. For instance, I saw cobras coming and just keeping to themselves. Or once I remember I was meditating and a parrot started to land on my shoulder and remain there. Or these Nila gaus, these blue antelopes, they are quite shy of human beings. They came and they grazed, and they were perfectly at home around me. I just had to make sure that I remained in meditation, especially when the cobras are there. You have to be really careful because you're united with them also, and they notice if you come out of the field and you are again in your small mind. I call it the small mind of the human being. So I have seen that also animals join you on this level. I would now like to go to my subject, and I have to put this time my wristwatch here so that I'm not too long and over time, where I would like to present to you some thoughts of regarding the deeper, one moment, here it is, the deeper goals of meditation. Now, everyone knows there are so many studies about this, that meditations or the meditation has a profound effect on the mind and on the capability for experience. It offers, in order to continue the analogy, a very powerful telescope that allows you to see very far. These things which are known and are talked about nowadays are that meditation will promote mindfulness or the sustained awareness of being an observer. It decreases stress and stress-related illnesses. It increases the activation in the left prefrontal cortex. That means it lifts your moods. You're no longer so dependent on the moods which come and go. It increases the power and reach of very fast gamma wave brain waves, which promotes learning and so on. And it is quintessential, really, in training the attention. And once you have trained your attention, you will create a new version, a better version, if you have the attention on the right things, of yourself, because it changes the neurological wiring up there, the attention. People who are more learned than me in these fields could give you lists and lists and lists how meditation is good on that level. I would call this the first level of meditation. We find in the yoga tradition that meditation is meant to still the waves of the mind, to make it still. That's already quite good. But I would like to say that there is even a deeper goal than just stilling the restless, often anxiety-driven mind. And that is to look what is visible, and the mind is no longer in waves that are influenced by what is going on outside. I would like to express it a little bit like this. Usually our consciousness looks outward or perceives outward through the senses. It's almost like we are there inside and we look through the window of our senses into the world and receive data which we interpret. But imagine the looker turns around. The observer observes itself, or consciousness observes consciousness. At that time, a shift takes place, and the consciousness moves to an entirely deeper level. We could almost give the example of when the waves of a lake come down, you can look through the lake and see what is there at the bottom. I live at a beautiful place just next to a lake, and I have had the experience that before I go out of the house door and go down to the lake. There's a rowing boat and there is a bench, and then I could jump into the lake, which I sometimes do. So on that day when I came down to the lake, it was still, absolutely still. And I could look down. Do you know what I found? I found old silver. I think the English word is cutleries, knives, spoons, and so on. Pure silver. And I thought, wow, I have become a rich man just by looking into the still lake. This happens when you look, when the mind is calm and you now look deeper and enter the world of consciousness and see and experience the consciousness. And when you do this, the effects come up to the mind. The influence comes up again to the mind, and the mind becomes also peaceful and experiences these long lists of benefits automatically. Now, most of the people who are trying to meditate are meeting at the beginning of attempting to meditate their own restless mind. And it seems for them to be extremely difficult to control or still the mind. The mind seems to do what it wants. It seems to have a life of its own. It seems to be sometimes like a teenager who's growing up and who wants to now be independent and of the house and the house rules and do what it wishes to do. I think we all have gone through this period, and some of you have children and they know what that is. It seems our mind is also like this. That's why Christian said that he has the tools to uplift his mind into a higher vibrational pattern. But sometimes, although he has the tools, he seems to not be able to use them. There is an old saying, if you are really as strong as you say, tell your mind what it should think for the next 5 minutes, what it should feel as emotions for the next 5 minutes. And it seems to be paradox. When you sit down to control it, it becomes, as Arjuna says in the Bhagavad Gita, like the raging wind. Try to stand in the way of the wind and control it. It's not possible so easily. The mind seems to be elusive. It seems to escape, especially when you want to control it and meditate. I have heard people who meditate saying to me, it becomes even worse, the thing. Yogis have acknowledged this or known this since a long time, and they have given us a very effective means by which we can catch hold of the mind. And this means we will hear much more about it from Eddie Stern in a little while, is the breath, the yogic breath. This morning, Eddie, who is really a renowned yoga teacher, said you can become a yogi in 5 minutes when you learn to breathe, because the breath has an immediate effect on the mind. It can still it immediately. The Chandogya Upanishad, I think in this circle all of you have heard about the wisdom of the Upanishads, gives a beautiful analogy. It says, the mind is like a falcon in training. Such a falcon is fastened by a little rope to a perch. In the beginning, the falcon will fly left and right, but in the end, it will come to rest at the very perch to which it is fastened. In the same way, my dear son, Upanishadic language, does the mind come to stillness when it is fastened to breath. Because indeed, breath catches the mind and gives it rest. Breathing is and direct access to the mind, which is often elusive. Therefore, in most meditation techniques, which are effective, one starts with the very first start is one connects with the physical body. Then one calms the mind through breathing. And then the real meditation can start. It's not that there it should stop. It is, I would not have become a rich man if just the lake would have become still. I needed to look inside. And then I found the silver on the ground. In much the same way, that deepening the deeper aspects of meditation bring you to the consciousness, to the unrestricted consciousness, to the free consciousness, to the consciousness in which you can entirely abandon yourself in willful surrender and experience the qualities of the consciousness that is, it is eternal, it's the substratum of everything. It is full of inner knowledge, doesn't need the mind for this to be full of knowledge, and it is blissful. It is not happy, it is blissful. That is an acceleration. I said this morning in the conference, which I very much appreciated, there were very interesting contributions, that I do like in this forum, which Marcus has initiated, that there is a long overdue marriage happening. The marriage between the consciousness which goes outside, the scientific exploration of the world, hopefully the unbiased scientific exploration, and then it is also open to explore the path of the consciousness which goes downwards, or better, inside. And I really want to encourage you, as you train your consciousness, as you try to access it, as you try to work on this level, to use both directions, out and in. Remain curious. The world is also rested on consciousness, and if you can learn to look like a curious student into the world without valuing or judging or compartmentalizing anything, but just see it as a huge classroom for learning, to grow, and then go inside and taste what the scriptures have always called as the amrita, the nectar, which is there when you can bring the mind, make the mind peaceful. I will now end, but before I will do something which is hopefully not too extraordinary. I celebrated my birthday yesterday. I'm now an old man, approaching 70 years of age, but I count differently. For my understanding, I'm 50 years young, because I'm practicing the spiritual path and meditation since that time. It was 50 years ago when I started. And I got a gift, and I want to give you now a gift. I got flowers. I want to give everyone who's here listening also a gift of appreciation. I know that you are interested in spirituality, in consciousness. I know also that you are open to explore in two ways, into the world which science explores, but also in the subjective experience. And I want to encourage you, please do not become discouraged if you see things which are, of the small mind. Let us politely say it like this. But become encouraged by seeing your possibility. Then I want to give you something which a birthday child can give, your personal garland. The virtual garland. That's also easier. The garland in the consciousness. I thank you very much. All the best, and I'm very curious now for the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Satchidanand. Please mute. Yes, thank you very much, Satchidanand Swami. And you can see in the chat so many appreciating and so many wishing you a happy birthday. So, and it was, I don't want to, I really just like to hand over the word to Eddie, because you can exactly start the point where Satchidanand Swami encouraged us in this speech, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Marcus. Can you hear me okay? Great. Okay, pleasure to be back again. Shall I begin? Great, super. So thank you, Maharaj, and happy birthday again. Before we begin, if everyone would just sit comfortably for a moment and hold in your mind's eye that garland, that the pushpamala that Maharaj was holding out to us. And as you inhale through your nostrils, you can close your eyes. Imagine that you're drawing in the scent of those roses from the garland. And as you exhale, feel the enjoyment of the divine scent of those roses. And again, as you inhale, imagine that you're drawing in the scent of those roses. And exhaling, feeling the enjoyment and satisfaction of the smell. We'll do that one more time, and this time as you inhale, savor the incoming breath as you imagine you're smelling the roses. Draw out the enjoyment of the smell. And just relax in a very calm way as you exhale. Let's do that one more time. Just draw out the enjoyment of the smell of the roses as you breathe in. And relax as you breathe out. Okay, and then let's go ahead and open the eyes. So we're going to be discussing prana and breath. We'll be doing a short breathing practice as well. And perhaps when you were breathing in at that moment and imagining the smell of roses, you naturally felt your breathing get longer. And maybe as you were breathing in the scent of the rose and imagining it, you actually smelled something deep in the nostrils and felt an emotional satisfaction or connection to the beauty of the smell, or some intangible sensation associated with it. So this is a very practical experiment, and it's a nice kind of example or elucidation of prana, because prana, although it's often translated as breath or it's translated as the vital force, it seems to be, from the Hindu texts, to be much, much more than that. The incoming air itself is the prana coming in. But the direction of the breath deep into the nasal cavity near the sense of smell is an intention, and intention is also prana. The molecules that carry smell, that touch the olfactory nerves, that then carry that information to the brain, and then the brain translating that information into an experience, is also under the jurisdiction of prana. And any memory or association that we have with that smell is also under the jurisdiction of prana. And then the relaxation in the exhalation is also part of this process of what prana is. So prana is, and again, there's so many books and so many elucidations on prana, I'm not going to be able to explain it to you, but I can give us some of my ruminations and some of my studies on the topic. Prana is, according to the Prashna Upanishad, which is a very beautiful text with many teachings on prana. I'll just read one or two quick things. Prana is fire, and prana as fire gives heat. It is also the sun, the clouds, Lord Indra, who is the Vedic deity who represents the interconnectedness of consciousness. Prana is air, earth, also the moon. To be brief, it is gross when it is the effect, and it is subtle when it is the cause. Prana is immortal, and all this indeed is prana. Prana is both inside and outside of everything, though its names and forms vary. Prana is the sun outside, and it is the I within us. As apana, it holds the earth in its place, and also holds the body, each body in its place, keeping it from going up or falling down. Then as Vyana, it pervades the world and also pervades the body. So what we see is this idea that, that there is one ruling energy. There's a presence of one energy behind the functioning of the entire universe. And that energy exists as a macrocosm, as a universal constant, and as a microcosm, like our human body and all of the things that we see created here on the earth, and all the things we can observe in space. And so prana, as this one energy behind the entire universe and all manifestation, has these different representations. Okay, so that's just a little bit of background on prana. Now let's look at the word prana itself. The word prana itself means anna, breath or that which moves, and pra, that which comes before. So prana is that which causes all things to move. That which causes all things to move. We might identify breath as one of the things that causes all things to move, because when we're born, the first thing we do is we take a breath. And that breath keeps the life force happening. Of course, life is going on inside the mother's womb, but we're not breathing, but the mother is indeed breathing. And that is providing us with our life force to be sustained. And then when we're born, we now need to take over that on our own. So a breath comes in and a breath goes out, and the cycle continues. Our mother passed breath along to us. We are breathing because our mothers and fathers, of course, have given us life. But our life is sustained through the process of breathing. But that impulse which is causes things to move and continue to move, that is called prana. The absolute consciousness, according to the Hindu texts, manifests itself as prana for the sake of creation. And we see this in the Purusha Sukta, where the Supreme Being sacrifices his being or body for the sake of creation. And so as the absolute manifests itself as prana, it becomes basically the life breath of everything in the universe and causes all things to move. Now, a life breath doesn't necessarily have to be an actual physical breath. It could just be the impulse for things to be created, the impulse for movement, the impulse for change, the impulse for potential, you could say, and for creation. So all of these aspects make up prana, because of course there's there wasn't always oxygen on this planet for us to breathe. Oxygen was only created about 2.3 or so billion years ago, and over about a 10 million year or so period of time, the atmosphere became oxygenated enough so multicellular beings could begin to leave the oceans and populate the earth. Now we take oxygen for granted. We take our breath for granted. We take all of these things to be eternal constants, but actually the appearance of oxygen is a fairly new thing in the short span of time that our little planet has been here. Okay, so from the yogic point of view, prana as a potential also contains something that we could call a tendency within it. And it's the tendency of the unmanifest to become manifest, and it is the tendency of an equilibrium to begin to vibrate, to begin to move, to begin to form patterns. And so as the equilibrium, which is spoken of in the Sankhya, begins to vibrate or move through awareness or through self-reflection, two things happen. One, prana assumes a subjective nature. And in that subjective nature, prana becomes something called mind, but not an individual mind at that point, just a cosmic mind. And then assuming an objective nature, prana becomes matter, or the material elements that we see all around us. So just to backtrack again one more time, the Sankhya says that there is a creative potential called pradhana, or nature, which rests in an equilibrium. Something disturbs that equilibrium, and then that equilibrium begins to move and vibrate and pattern over itself. And two of the potentials that occur within that equilibrium, because there are many, come from prana. One is the cosmic mind as the observing witness aspect, and the other is the objective nature, which is that which we are observing. So from prana comes two things, something that can observe and experience, and the thing which is being experienced. And so when that pattern becomes more cemented, the mind develops and develops and develops, eventually it becomes individuated, ends up in something like us, and we start to take these things as reality. So the entire patterning process of prana is that it patterns over itself, and then those patterns become fixed. And in those fixed patterns forms identity. And then those identities also become fixed. But within the identities, there's a very limited bandwidth of perceiving or experiencing what we would call reality. So we can only hear a limited bandwidth through our ears, see a limited bandwidth through our eyes, a limited bandwidth through our nose and mouth and skin. And that limited bandwidth of information, we take it to be reality and then respond to it in that type of a way. And so what the yogis recognized was that we have gone through this process of seeming to take on these individual forms which we feel are separate from nature, even though we're part of nature, we're expressions of nature. And as the sense that we become separate from nature becomes more fixated or solid as a pattern, then we identify with the separation rather than the unity, and then all sorts of things become disturbed. And the thing that becomes disturbed is our own individual prana, in fact. And the disturbance of our individual life force pranas then leads to something called dukkha, or suffering. And within this, we become more convinced that our condition is real, that our condition is located and fixated to us in time and space, and therefore that I am that person that suffers, etc. So the yoga traditions all have evolved to basically deal with this basic problem, that we think that we're separate beings, even though we're expressions of nature. And because we think we're separate, we suffer. but the suffering is illusory. And so therefore, we should begin to find ways to release ourselves from this suffering in the most direct experiential way that we can possibly do. So we have our own direct experience of truth and of reality, of being. So the basic principle is that when our internal pranas are disturbed, that means that our mind is disturbed, and when the mind is disturbed, then the breath is disturbed, because our breath is our most apparent physical expression of life force, of prana. The breath sustains us. So when our breathing is disturbed, then the mind is disturbed. And the breathing will only be disturbed if the mind is disturbed, because the mind is disturbed by some deeper identity issue as well. So in the meditation that Maharaj was speaking about, we're looking to resolve the very, very deep underlying disturbance isn't quite the right word here, but we're going to use it anyway, that lie below the thinking mind. And these are, there's a Sanskrit word for it, which is avidya, which is not a full and complete knowing of who we truly are. That when we know who we fully are, when we solve that problem, there's no disturbance in the mind and there's no disturbance in the prana. But when we don't know who we are fully, but we only partially know who we are, then we have all different disturbances that are arising that we identify with. We know a little bit who we are because we're enough to be sitting here at a conference like this talking about prana and talking about science and talking about consciousness. So we're actively questioning and seeking. And what we want to do is we want to then exist in this space together in a very particular way. As I mentioned in the talk earlier, there's a Sanskrit word for space is ka. And space isn't just the element, but it's this idea of an expanded state of consciousness. That space is this expanded state of consciousness. And when we have suffering, or du, which means difficult or bad or hard or any of these words like that, then that suffering is really a limited space. It's existing in a space which is constricted and constrained, and it's not open, and we feel stuck there. It's a closed space. And so we want to begin to turn this dukkha into sukha. And su, often translated as good, means to enter into easily. So we want to now turn this constricted space into a space that where we can easily and smoothly and freely enter into an expanded space of consciousness, which is going to be a feeling of happiness, of joy, of openness. And so part of the process of the yoga practices are to learn and identify first what is dukkha, what is suffering, and how now to move towards sukha, towards an expanded space, and then to transcend both suffering and happiness, joy and success, pain and pleasure, success and failure, praise and blame, all of the pairs of opposites, which actually are eventually going to be two sides of the same coin. Okay, so we're going to do a small breathing practice together right now. We're going to have these basic ideas as we do the breathing practice. At number one, there is a presence of one energy in the universe, or one energy behind the functioning of the universe. And that's prana. It sustains all things, including our very breath. And there's a constant exchange of energy from one object to another. So that means that I'm one object, the world is another object, very, very briefly. And I'm in a constant exchange with air, with light, with temperature, with sound, with smell. In fact, the yogis say that the world we live in is our extended physical body. This is our individual physical body, and the world is an extended physical body. We're in a symbiotic relationship with. But we've fallen out of the symbiosis, and now we want to restore it. So we do things to slow down and to feel this reciprocity of ourselves and the environment. So when we, one biological fact of the world that we live in is that there is oxygen, a certain amount, about 21% oxygen in our biosphere. And there's a certain pressure system in the biosphere from our planet up to the level of where space begins. This is our biosphere. We have a different lung pressure internally. And the pressure change between our lungs and the outer environment means that air is being pushed into us through gravity and through the biosphere. And then that air gets pushed in, and then we release it back out. So even though we might think that we are the ones who are breathing, actually, it's the biosphere that is breathing us. And when we are born from our mother's womb and we come out into the world, and that first breath of air is pushed into us, then an automatic symbiosis with the environment starts to occur. And as babies, we're absolutely fine with that. But then what happens? We begin to grow. We form an identity. We have traumas that we experience as children. We have the habits of our parents and the environment we grow in are superimposed on top of us. We develop fear. We develop security issues. And every time a little trauma or a fear or a security issue occurs, we hold on to our breath a little. And this perfect symbiosis with the environment becomes interrupted. And in that holding, in that tension, the nervous system starts to tighten. And every time we tighten a little and we hold on to it, we are cementing ourselves with a physiological expression of not knowing who we are. And we create a new identity that we hold to and we hold to. And this is one of the roots of dukkha, of suffering. So the yogi said, change your breathing pattern. In the changing of the breathing pattern, you recognize again the symbiosis with the environment, that the biosphere is breathing us because we are part of the environment. And as well, we release tension, we release stress, and we begin to release the bondage of ideas to identity that we've been holding that are tightened through the breathing process. Okay, so very briefly, that's a little bit on prana. Now let's do a short practice. So if you would all sit comfortably, please. You don't have to sit ramrod straight. Even just being a little bit relaxed in your chair or on the floor is good. And please just breathe into your nostrils and breathe out from your nostrils. And take a moment to acknowledge that you are a breathing being. You are a person breathing. And if you like, you can breathe up high towards your olfactory nerves, where the sense of smell is, and feel your breath naturally elongating. And the next time you breathe in high up towards the olfactory nerves, enjoy the sensation of your breath, like you would enjoy your favorite song, your favorite kirtan, your favorite bhajan. Or you can enjoy the process of breathing like you would enjoy the favorite smell of a flower or of the fresh air outside. And feel how the breath naturally elongates. Okay, now we're going to do a 2-minute breathing practice to balance the branches of the autonomic nervous system, which the yogis rightly said was not really automatic, but was just semi-automatic. So I'm going to play some sounds from my phone, and you're going to breathe along. We all will breathe along with them. One sound will be an inhalation, one sound will be an exhalation. Just try to line up your breath precisely with the sound, if you can. Here we go. This is the inhale. And that's the exhale. Inhaling here. Exhaling here. Inhaling. And exhaling. On the exhalation, feel your mind relaxing. Okay, without the sound, do one more breath on your own. Now just try one small experiment. Just feel as though your lungs, in the process of breathing, are extending out from your nostrils, from your nose, almost as if your lungs were in front of your nostrils. So there's no tension to pull any breath inside, because your lungs already exist in the air in front of your nose. And at the end of each exhalation, just pause for a moment. And in that pause, let your mind become quiet. And feel when your body tells you it's time to inhale again. And when it is, that's when you breathe in. Sometimes the breath remains held out for some time. You feel there's no need to breathe. And then the body tells you from the pranasthana, the standing place of prana, near the heart, okay, let the prana flow back in. And you do, with no resistance.
Okay, enough. Hello.
To conclude, please breathe in one long, slow inhalation. And a slow exhalation. Do one more breath. Now, normally when we inhale, we think we're taking in breath, and when we exhale, we think we're pushing out breath. Imagine now on your next breath that the universe or the biosphere is pushing out breath. We're taking it in. And when we exhale, we're pushing the breath back out into the universe around us.
All right.
And one more time, let the biosphere breathe out and let's us take that in. And then on the next exhalation, you can relax. And then as you're ready, you can open your eyes. Okay. So that concludes our little breathing practice. At the end there, basically what we were doing is just trying to process a little. I think someone has their microphone unmuted. It's definitely not my phone. Okay, so Marcus, I see you've come back on. I will hand it back over to you. I hope that was a useful practice and exercise.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. For me, it's always difficult to, after such a spiritual practice, immediately jump back into my moderation role here. And yes, thank you so much. It's really amazing how much energy such a simple exercise can give you back. And I especially like this this way of meditating about breathing, that when I breathe in, actually the universe breathes out, and if I breathe out, that the universe breathes in, and like this feel the being connected. It's very, very beautiful, and I will not forget this.
Beautiful. Yeah, you did.
Thank you. So welcome everyone back.
Yeah.
Are you still here, Brenda? And
Yeah, can you hear
Chris is there. Yes. Oh, here, Sachinanda Swami and Christian sitting in front of this beautiful picture. So thank all of you to walk this journey together. And I just like to see in this concluding round some of what are your reflections, something coming up, something you like to share with all of us still. Who has some thoughts on his mind?
I'd like to say something. It's to do with the putting together what Chris and Brenda were talking about, which is the coherent field and its accumulation and development, which I think we are actually underway with that. But although it's large absolute numbers, it's small numbers in relation to the whole planet and the power structures that hold us in place at the moment. But I think that as Peter Dunov always emphasizes, there's no power more powerful than love in its cosmic sense. And love is what connects us. And that love is also light. And the two are inseparable, as people who've had deeper experiences or accessed this deeper structure of reality know for themselves. And this, to me, seems to be the direction of our evolution, both personally and collectively. And so towards what Barbara Marx Hubbard would call Homo Universalis. So how do we become more universal in ourselves, but also universalize that across the planet with like-minded organizations? And the Galileo Commission is just one initiative among many, trying to bring people together. We do have 30 partner organizations now, so there is a certain coherence emerging.
Thank you.
Brenda, I think you're muted.
Now can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Just elaborating on what you just said, with an observation from our lab research. I mentioned earlier that the effects that we saw were always very small. However, when we did the quantification, the calculations, it turns out that if you can affect just about 1 bit in 10,000, with enough bits, you can shift the mean of the distribution. So we don't all have to be there. Just a critical mass of us can make the difference. It's a more optimistic view than hoping to change everybody's mind.
And it resonates with David Hawkins, his work in Power versus Force. Force is what we have in the world at the moment, and it creates opposition. Spiritual power unites.
It's good.
Can I say, am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you. I would just like to come back to this analogy, which I heard a few times during this conference, that different telescopes offer us a different perception of the world. And I believe really that if we, for instance, here in this world of consciousness, can assemble a large assortment of various telescopes, that means various serious processes to discover consciousness, or to draw the veil a little bit more open. It is not so easy to discover it in its entirety, but that this will be eventually something which is a very good contribution to the world. I think someone needs to do this work, to look at this phenomena through various paths or methods, because the method which you apply to study reality will give you a specific result related to that method. It seems reality is so vast that there is not just one explanation to it. There could be one if there are so many, how do you say, telescopes, and then certain principles will emerge which are same. And I think this is a very exciting work. I'm very intrigued. I listened to all the presentations, and I continue to expand my consciousness while I'm looking very intently through my own telescope as a personal practice. So I want to thank you all, the contributors of the present and of the future, who are interested to join in that approach. I think something very amazing will come out. That is what I wanted to say.
I think we need a new word. We've got the telescope and the microscope, so something like nooscope. Well, that's not the answer. Something with gnosis. That is a different lens that enables us to look into inner space. So something which adds scope at the end and something appropriate before it is maybe what we're looking for.
Interoscope.
Yeah, interoscope. And yes. It reminds me of a meeting I went to in Uxmal in Mexico in 1994. And we had Daddy Janki there from the Brahma Kumaris. And she said that what she wanted to develop was not scientists, but silentists. Beautiful word. And so we've had some expert silentists on the call today.
That's an amazing word. I love that.
How about the psychoscope?
Psychoscope. Yep, I think that could work.
I already have a psychoscope.
I love it.
Of course, we could go with,
you've got
we could try a pranoscope.
We can try it out on people.
if you look at astrology, that gives us also an additional nice view, an additional nice scope. And since we have a lot of Aquarius energy, especially in the next 20 years, as the society in general, this Aquarius principle stands for individuality and freedom, and also a higher consciousness, thinking out of the box, going new ways, being innovative. I think it's a very good idea for all of us to be open for new ways, either with our introscope and also with science. But the message basically is leave your old habits and start to explore, start new ways. And I believe when we all do that, that we tune in our inner scope and let us be guided. With many people doing that, we will have a big impact on the consciousness altogether, and each one is contributing. And it's important that we start individually with this process. So there's no need to wait for anybody or anything to give us our okay, because the freedom is also something we need to take in our own hands. So it's important that we, as each individual, start with the process in the direction we want to see the world going. So it's our responsibility, and together we can achieve everything.
Okay. Yes.
Kathy Messina suggested 360-degree halo perspective. We can see how our flower of life unfolds together or individual. We are one. It is called a halo, thus the halo scope.
Halo scope.
Yes, I see there. Our audience is so creative. We got so many scopes already, and I think this will be a lasting contribution of this conference, which we can give to the discourse.
Well, good. It's not coming through very quickly, so you'll have to let us know what the alternatives are, and we can vote on it or something.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
all right. Thank you so much. So this was a nice lesson that we can actually, the technology is following the consciousness. Today we saw, after we readjusted our consciousness in the right way, connecting, then all the technical problems were gone. So this gives us great hope that by adjusting internally, we can also get things right again on this planet. And to a certain degree, of course, depending on our own source and the divine consciousness within us can also shape the history on this planet in a very, very good and promising way. So thanks all of you, all the speakers who were here, and also all you out there for being so patient at almost 3 hours now. That's a long program. I think next time we will have a break in between. I think this could be a great discovery. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed it. And I see you're still creative in creating so many scopes. Keep on. You can write us. And yes, I wish you all over the world still a beautiful day, and hope to see you all again. And let's continue on this common journey of consciousness, because we are one humanity. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.